Well, welcome everybody from Jennifer from Lakeland, Florida. Anna just woke up for this workshop, so shout out to Anna for waking up for the workshop. We're going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and we're going to assume that you are in Hawaii, and so it's really early in the morning. And so that's why you just woke up. But no, my name's Evan, and if you don't know me, I work full-time for an organization called Thirst Project, and today we're going to talk about Thirst Project, but we're going to talk about global citizenship. What does that mean? How do we become more of a global citizen in the world today? And I have somebody who's going to help me lead this workshop, who's an amazing individual, and I'm going to allow that individual to introduce themselves right now. So Indigo, go ahead, my friend.
Hi guys, I'm Indigo Parlin. Right now I serve as an international trustee on the Key Club International Board, and I serve CNH, Carolinas, and the MNDAC districts. And I'm really excited to be here with you guys today.
I love it. You're awesome, Indigo. Thanks for being here. Indigo is a really close student to the organization. She has fought alongside Thirst Project to help us in the water crisis. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the water crisis. But before we do, I want to unpack global citizenship. I think it's important. I want to address some questions. And then I'm going to pass it off to Indigo so she can share just some of her wisdom and insight into global citizenship, Thirst Project, and everything in between. And it sounds like if you guys have questions, please just drop it in the Q&A tab, if I'm correct. And if you have a comment, you can place it in the chat. That's how we're going to do this workshop. So love that. But I'm going to jump in. And as I jump in, I'm going to share my screen, if that's all right with everyone. And I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint so we can do this Microsoft PowerPoint action. So give me 2 seconds as I share my screen. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint, and we're going to make magic happen as I talk about global citizenship. So what you should be seeing is a PowerPoint right now. Indigo, correct me if I'm wrong, you can intervene, but it should just say Thirst Project on the screen. It's one big slide.
You're golden.
I love it. Amazing. So like I said, my name's Evan. I work for an organization called Thirst Project. To kind of tee it up and give you some background, if you know nothing about Thirst Project, we're the world's largest youth water organization. We build freshwater wells in developing countries through students all over the world. And we're an official partner of Key Club International. So if that makes us any more legit in your mind, then take that as a stamp of approval, all right? Because we are an official partner of Key Club, and we love working with Key Club. And I've been lucky enough to work with Key Club groups around the world for the past 6 years. And what I think is important is as we work with Key Club, I've come to realize that you all are all about service and leadership, right? I mean, that's what we preach from the stage, in club meetings, at community events. But when we look at service and leadership, it's pretty complex. It's not as simple as just service and leadership. And I know Key Clubbers who have worked with Thirst Project to help end the global water crisis, who have come into some issues when going out to the community to field support to help give people clean water. I'm going to mention this more than once, but have you ever heard the phrase, man, why are we helping people around the world when we can just help people here locally in our community? And I've worked with groups in Maine. I've worked with groups in California where they've gotten that feedback. It says, hey, people need water, but what about what's happening right now in Maine or California or Montana or Georgia, et cetera? There are issues back home that we need to solve first. And that's why I think it's important to talk about global citizenship. And so what does this mean? What does this concept mean to you? When somebody says global citizenship, how do you define it? And are you a global citizen? If somebody asked you, are you a global citizen? How would you answer that question? I've done a lot of research into global citizenship, and I've talked to a lot of professionals in the nonprofit industry with different government agencies. And in all my research and all my understanding of global citizenship, I was able to condense the meaning of global citizenship to me down to 2 words. So if I had to define global citizenship, but I only had 2 words to do it, here's how I would do that. Global citizenship to me means perspective and identity. And if I even had to tie each of those words to either global or citizenship, you can see in this slide how I've done just that. So global, that's the perspective part of global citizenship, and identity, that's the citizenship part of global citizenship. So what does all this mean, right? I've asked you to define global citizenship in your head, and then I've given you a definition, but I've given you just 2 more words. And so I think we need to further unpack these words. So if global citizenship is all about perspective and identity, then what is perspective and identity? What does that mean? And how do we define those 2 words that make up global citizenship? Well, I want to dive in, and where I want to start actually is in citizenship or identity. Because if you think of a citizen or you think of identity, I would oftentimes equate identity or being a citizen to what you belong to. And so when I unpack identity, I would say identity is shaped, it is formed by who/what is around you now. So the people, places, things, culture, customs, and who/what has come before you. The people, places, things, culture, customs. So let me give you some examples. If I asked you to tell me more about your identity, oftentimes people in the United States might go to being a US citizen, or you might be from the state of Georgia. People oftentimes will go to those types of things, where you're from, maybe even some things about your family. And a prime example is where I'm at right now. So I'm coming live from Kentucky, but I live in California, and I've lived in California for the past 6 years, but I was born and raised in Kentucky. And 2 days ago, I was in a rural part of Kentucky, and somebody asked me, they said, "Oh, where are you from? Like, why are you shipping a package?" I was at a UPS. "Why are you shipping a package to Los Angeles?" And I said, "Oh, well, I live in Los Angeles. And I'm in rural Kentucky." And these people in rural Kentucky say, "Oh, you live in Los Angeles? That is so cool. And I'd love to live in Los Angeles." And they went to the back and they started talking about how cool Los Angeles is. But as I live in Los Angeles and I meet new people and I go around and people ask me, "Oh, where are you from?" And I say, "Kentucky. I grew up in Kentucky." I have never heard anybody say, "Oh, that's so cool. You're from Kentucky. Oh, that's amazing," right? People automatically associate certain things to certain places or people. So for example, if you're from California, I might assume different things about California. Oh, the beaches and Hollywood and entertainment. If you're from Kentucky, and I can say this because I'm from Kentucky, I might assume different things about people in Kentucky, whether it's the hillbilly stuff or you talk funny or Appalachia, etc. And I think the same is true even for the Key Club world. So if anybody here has been to International Convention, or if anybody's been around the Key Club world for a few years and you've interacted with other districts or other students from other districts, you could give an example of identity similar to what I just gave you. So let me unpack this. If you're from C&H district, oftentimes if you're an icon, people will make assumptions about the C&H district based on what they're wearing or based on what they're saying. And the same could be said for other districts as well. And so I think identity is just interesting to think about with respect to people, places, things, culture, customs, etc. And oftentimes this is the old nature versus nurture debate, right? Who you are today, like how did you become who you are? And oftentimes I think it's because of these different things that not just exist today around you, but also the things that have come before you, whether it's family, whether it's the place that you were born and grew up, etc. And I think another great example, I just took a vacation to Florida, and you can see people responding to COVID in different ways, right? And not to dive into a super sensitive issue, but parts of Florida and parts of the South were treating COVID very differently than California. And it's interesting to see how places form people's identity, form people's belief system. And so to wrap all this up, global citizenship, I think a big part of it is our identity. It's what's come before you and what is around you right now. And ultimately, what do you belong to? And I want to go further on this, and I want to ask a question, and I don't want you to answer this at all in the Q&A section or the chat, but I want you to think about it. If I asked you the question, what's the most important thing in your life right now? What would you say? Man, I'm just so curious. Think about it in your head. Think about the answer to that question. What is the most important thing in your life right now? It's not a trick question at all. I think what's interesting is as I go to schools around the world and I talk to students and I try to get them to believe in the water crisis, believe in the work that we're doing, oftentimes students' identity is wrapped around, and their perspective is wrapped around a few things that are very prevalent and common in a student's world. So for example, the classes you take, the sports that you play, the hobbies or interests that you have. And so I'll go and I'll mention these things and I'll be able to relate to students because those things are similar in the student world, these important things. And so the challenge with global citizenship is to think beyond those things, to think that, man, we live in a world where it's bigger than the classes we're taking. It's bigger than the sports that we're playing. It's bigger than our friend group. It's bigger than our hobbies or interests. And that's what being a global citizen is all about. And so I want to jump into the second part of global citizenship. So I talked about identity, and I want to talk about how the UN defines global citizenship before I dive into perspective. So the UN defines global citizenship as this idea that one's identity transcends, even as it respects geographical and national borders or boundaries, or however you want to say it. And so I think that's really interesting to look at that definition, is that your identity tied into global citizenship and its relationship between geographical and national borders. And so I just want you to think about that definition, as the United Nations is a huge proponent, I would say, of global citizenship because of who they are and how they bring multiple different people groups and countries and leaders together for good. I think that's a good definition to kind of lean into and unpack and explore. But I want to talk about perspective. So in the same way that I talked about identity, I would say identity is who you belong to, and also it's formed by who and what came before you and who and what is around you right now. I would say perspective could really be condensed into three things: how you see yourself, how you see the world, and how do you see yourself in the world, which is really, really important, right? It's not just how you see yourself in the world, self-awareness, or the perspective of how you see the world and what's going on, but how do you see yourself in the world? What role do you have to play as a part of a global community? And so I'd love for you to answer those questions in your head. And they're deep questions. I mean, they're difficult questions, but they're questions that I would argue we need to wrestle with in order to achieve true global citizenship. I think they're important. And related to perspective, I want to give you this story. So if you know anything about Thirst Project, our CEO and founder, Seth Maxwell, he started Thirst Project as a student about 11 years ago. And when he started Thirst Project, he was a student, just like everybody here, trying to get other students around the world to join our cause. And as a student in the United States, if you were born and you were raised in the United States, I would argue, just as everybody else around the world, that you have limited perspective on what people are going through as students in different countries. Now, if you've been lucky enough to potentially live in another country, move to the United States, you might hold a different perspective to a variety of different things, the value of education, et cetera. But as we go around the United States and the world, and we try to get students involved in the work that we're doing, we have to continue to increase students' perspective on the issue of the global water crisis, because most of our students, they live in communities where access to clean water is not an issue. It simply is not. When we take showers, we can cook, we can clean, we have water on tap, it's drinkable, it's great. And so in convincing students that there's an issue that exists that you don't have to wrestle with, that you're not going through, this point that I'm about to make is really important. So I pulled this picture. It's about the sequencing of the human genome. But I mentioned Seth earlier because Seth loves to make this point in front of audiences when he speaks, and I want to make the same point. So if somebody asked you what is the greatest scientific discovery of our lifetime, what would you say? And again, I'd be really curious to know your answer. And for some people, we've heard different things. And for other people, based on their bias, we've heard different things. But Seth says, in his opinion, the greatest scientific discovery of our lifetime is the sequencing of the human genome. And in the sequencing of the human genome, what we found out is that regardless of who you are, where you live, where you were born, whether you're a mother of 2 children in the middle of rural India struggling for survival, or whether you are a rich, affluent individual living in Beverly Hills, California, regardless of all of those things, the sequencing of the human genome proved that as people, 99.5% of our biological makeup, our genes are the same. And it's interesting that if 99.5% of our human genes are the same, we tend to focus 99.5% of our time on the 0.5% that makes us different. And in this revelation of the sequencing of the human genome, what we found is in our biology, man, there are so many similarities. Like, there are almost no differences. Now, what that doesn't mean is that we haven't had different life experiences. What that doesn't mean is that I would argue, like, people like to use this phrase, like, especially with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, like, I don't see color, we're all one race. I think what's interesting about this definition that I go back to with the United Nations, the idea that one's identity transcends even as it respects geographical and national borders. I think what's important to remember here is that, man, even with the sequencing of the human genome, science will tell us that, man, as people, there are so many similarities, like in our biology to our core, but we have to respect what makes us different and acknowledge those things and seek to understand what makes us different, where we come from, who we are, etc. And so I think that's a big part of perspective. As we say, how do you see yourself? How do you see the world? How do you see yourself in the world? I wanted to mention this sequencing of the human genome example because that is what we have tried to do at Thirst Project. We've tried to go around the world and tell people, man, there are 13-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 17-year-olds who like the same music that you like, who play the same sports that you play. And there are differences in your lifestyles, huge differences. But we would argue that as people, there are so many similarities that we can also align with. And so I want to share a couple stories with you, because this is quote unquote a Thirst Project workshop of just people that are living very different lives than I'm going to assume most of us are living. But hopefully these stories increase your perspective. And so the first story that I want to share with you is these two ladies who live in a community called Sikasebe. And the picture that you're looking at is of the community of Sikasebe, their water source. And it's a dried out riverbed. And these two ladies are forced to walk to this riverbed every single day to fetch water. And you look here and you don't see any water. So what they have to do is they have to dig, and they'll dig for 6 to 8 hours to access what little water is available beneath the surface. And that's the reality. And so my hope is that with every story that we tell, it increases a student's perspective. It says, man, like maybe you've never had to dig to get water that you need to survive, water that you need for drinking, washing, or cooking. But there are people around the world, people in this community of Sikasebe, who are forced to live that reality every single day. Or another story for you, which is these kids that go to a school in Lugedzeni in a rural part of Eswatini. And these kids, before we built this well that you see in front of this people group, they had to walk to school carrying 1.5 to 2 liters of water every single day because there was no water access at school. So if they wanted any water, if they wanted water to drink, if they wanted any water to be used with their lunch, they had to bring it themselves. I mean, can you imagine me telling you, and if you want anything to drink at school, there's no water fountains. You can't get water. You have to bring 1.5 to 2 liters for bathroom breaks, for drinking, for washing your hands, for anything. And that's students' reality around the world. But I would argue that most of us on this workshop, we've maybe never experienced that reality of having to bring our own water to school so we can have something to drink with, to wash with, to use the restroom with, etc. I have one more story for you, and it's of these two kids that are going to school at a school called Tentele Primary School. It's in rural Eswatini, but they didn't have water at school either. And so if they wanted water at school in their classrooms, they would send a couple kids from classrooms that would have to walk over 1 mile down to this water source, which is what you're looking at right now. And they would collect this water, and this is the water they use for drinking, washing, cooking, etc. And you can see how visibly contaminated this water is. And if that isn't bad enough, we talked to the head of school about how kids would have to leave class to go and collect water if they wanted something to drink or wash their hands with. But in certain seasons, there were crocodiles that were on this path that the kids would have to take to fetch water. And so a teacher oftentimes would have to accompany these kids just to make sure they were safe in going to collect water. And so I tell these 3 stories to hopefully increase your perspective. And I want to go back a couple slides, because this is another question that I want to ask you that I really want you to think about and not answer in the chat or in the Q&A section, but just answer in your head. And if I ask the question, what is the biggest issue that we face today as a global community? What would your answer be? And maybe it's topical because you're in a Thirst Project workshop and you want to be a teacher's pet and you're like, oh, the water crisis, that's a pretty big deal, right? But even before this workshop, what would you say is the biggest issue we face today as a global community? And I think your answer says a lot about your perspective in the world today. And so we take 2 things that are really topical. 1, I would argue for the global community. 2, I would argue for, yes, the global community, but maybe more so the United States right now, COVID-19 or the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And maybe if you ask somebody in Scandinavia, what is the biggest issue we face today as a global community? Maybe somebody in rural Scandinavia, the Black Lives Matter movement wouldn't even cross their mind. But I would argue, just as me being presumptuous, if you ask most people in the United States right now, like what is the biggest, or maybe one of the biggest issues we face today as a global community, you would have a lot of people answering, man, like racism is still very real, depending on the person, depending on where you're from, which again ties identity to perspective. Depending on where you live, depending on how you grew up, that will change your perspective, which is all related to global citizenship. And I know these are hot topics, but I think it's important to discuss these hot topics as we unpack global citizenship. And so in the few minutes I have left, I want to advance this PowerPoint, and these are the stories I told, and I want to talk about global citizenship. And so what I believe to be true about global citizenship are a few things. And this list isn't exclusive. There are more things that I think are true about global citizenship, or if you are a global citizen, I believe that you would lean into these few things that I want to talk about here. The first thing is belonging to the greater good. I would argue that global citizens consistently are breaking down the walls of division every single day. The things that divide people groups, I would argue global citizens are trying to bring people together. Oftentimes I talk about community, the power and influence of a group of people in your life. Man, I believe global citizens truly value community and belonging to this greater good. I also believe that global citizens are focused on advancing humanity at large, regardless of the issues we face. And so I think that's important for you as service leaders to know and understand that focusing on a local issue, I'll give an example of Los Angeles, California. Focusing on something like homelessness doesn't have to be mutually exclusive to focusing on global issues. Man, you can help contribute to multiple issues at the same time. And I think it's important to do both. I think it's important to understand your local community and identify local issues that you can contribute to. And I also think it's important to be aware of issues that are happening around the world and to ask yourself the question, how can I as a young person contribute to global causes? Because we as people, at least as the sequencing of the human genome has proved, we actually aren't that different. But there are different things that we need to recognize and acknowledge that do make us different. And so let's lean into those things and let's understand those things. The next thing is building bridges between people groups. I do believe that's what global citizens do. And so they find people that may be different for a variety of different reasons, but they seek to bring those people together. And the last thing, I mentioned it earlier, global citizens seek to become more aware of issues outside of their own community. And so ask yourself the question, man, what are issues that currently bind the community that I live in? And what are issues that maybe you've never heard of? And how can you become more aware of those issues, educate yourself, and empower yourself to believe that you can do something about those very issues? I want a couple more slides. This last one is just action steps. So if you want to become a global citizen, if you're like, man, I don't know. I don't know if I'm a global citizen. I don't know if I actually believe that my perspective is as great as it could be. I don't know if my identity is truly rooted in, contributing to the greater good or belonging to something bigger than myself. How can I get closer and closer to true global citizenship? Well, I'm going to say, one, it's not hard, but what also you need to acknowledge is that your perspective will always be changing, and your perspective will never be fully complete, if you will. I honestly don't even know what that looks like. And so it's just interesting to challenge and change your perspective constantly, but know that perspective is very personal. And so I want to give you a few action steps just to help you with global citizenship. If you want to achieve global citizenship, I would say these are a few great places to start. The first thing is travel. And that's fun. It's fun to think about travel. People ask me all the time, like, where's the coolest place that you think you've traveled? And recently I've been saying the Middle East. And so I've been to Qatar, Oman, Dubai, a few other Jordan, a few other places in the Middle East. And I think I love the Middle East so much because there's almost nobody like me there with respect to a few different things, like the color of my skin, the religion, like how they grew up. And so I love just traveling to different places. And when I say travel, like truly travel, right? Immerse yourself in the culture, eat the local food, commune with local people, engage with local customs. That is where true perspective changes. So that's my first recommendation. My second recommendation is make a list of the things that are opposite of who you are with respect to your identity. Man, maybe you're a religious person, and so seeking people that aren't as religious, or you kind of identify as somebody who belongs to a specific religion. And so what is a religion that's maybe different than that? Or your race, culture, customs, etc. And then have conversations with people that you feel like do not align with respect to certain parts of your identity. Seek to understand other people's point of view and surround yourself with those very people, the same people that you're having those conversations. And so first, man, identify people that are different than you. Second, have conversations with those people just to seek to understand others' points of view. And then third, actually surround yourself with those types of people on a consistent basis, right? One of the best things I did was move to Los Angeles, because in that I just moved into a city that's full of diversity compared to where I grew up in Kentucky. Right? Kentucky has almost no diversity where I live, but that's why I love the city of Los Angeles. So embrace and run to diversity. And that's the next thing. Live in a different city, state, or country. Study abroad, study abroad, study abroad. I did not study abroad, and I'm still such a huge proponent of study abroad because I know how formative of an experience it is to help you increase your perspective. The last two, educate yourself on global issues, reading, watching documentaries, etc. I mean, we live in 2020. The most socially connected and digitally connected generation the world has ever seen. So use that, use the resources around you. And the last one is fight. What do I mean by fight? What I mean is fight the forces of apathy, fight the forces of indifference, fight against the people who consistently ask the question, man, why do we need to help people all over the world when we have issues happening at home? And the answer to that question is, why can't we do both? right? Why can't we be people who, yes, belong to local cities and states and part of our identity, but also we belong to the greater good and we believe that issues are worth fighting for around the world. And so with all that, my last question, which is what I asked earlier, what's the biggest issue we face today as a global community? What's your answer to that question? I've heard a lot of people say a lot of different things. And this was pre-COVID when I was traveling and speaking a whole lot more. And I heard people say things like climate change, right? And I think climate change, some of you would agree, it's a pretty big issue that's happening right now in 2020. Maybe some of you would lean into more of what's currently happening in the United States specifically. Biggest issue, racism. Biggest issue, COVID-19, what's happening around the world, right? Pandemics and our ability to solve pandemics. I would say that all of those are really big issues. Racism, COVID-19 and pandemics, even the environmental crisis that we face. The water crisis is a big issue, but I don't think any of those issues are the biggest issues that we face. I think the biggest issue that we face today as a global community is the belief that someone else will save the world. It's this belief that, you know what, somebody else has got it. You know, I'm busy. I got sports I play and classes I take and other clubs I'm involved in. I don't have the time. And that's the biggest issue we face. And I'm excited that I know I'm in the company of amazing key clubbers who do incredible things for the world with respect to service and leadership. And I'm excited that we have a group of young people who are committed to contributing to the greater good. That's inspiring. And so that's who we are at Thirst Project, a group of young people trying to push other young people to grow as global citizens. And so thank you all so much for the time. Man, I appreciate it. I'm going to pass it off to the better half of this presentation, Indigo, who's going to share some awesome wisdom and insight. And Indigo, I haven't kept up with any of the comments of the chat or anything. So if we need to do some of that before we move on, you tell me. But I'll also drop my email, if that's possible, in the chat, in a form that people, if they want to get involved with Thirst Project, that people can fill out. Is that better to be put in the chat or the Q&A section?
I'd put that in the chat. And there are a few questions in the Q&A section, but we can definitely do those at the end.
Love it. Awesome. Yeah, I'll drop a form that you guys can fill out if you want to get involved with Thirst Project, and I will pass this off to Indigo. So cool.
Awesome. So I'm kind of going to be going over how, like, my personal journey in finding how to balance a local community versus a global community and how we can serve both. And for me, this is a really important topic to me, especially since my sophomore year, because I kind of was questioning my role as a global citizen. And this happened when I was introduced to a book called Toxic Charity by Robert Lupton. And it basically put all these doubts in my mind about our global aid system, especially like our nonprofits in the US that are, outsourcing to third world countries. It talked about, like our current aid system is actually harming those that we're trying to help in our global community. And if you're unfamiliar with this concept, an example, there's one by Dambisa Moyo in her book, Dead Aid. And it talks about like these mosquito nets. And there's a guy in Africa who has a shop that makes mosquito nets, and he has, 10 employees, and the profits from the mosquito net shop help all these employees' families and all of their dependents. And then all of a sudden, these mosquito nets are imported from somewhere like America, and they're donated, and that shop has to be shut down. And all of a sudden, all these people are out of work. So there's this problem where the aid system is fostering dependence. And this problem, starting with my sophomore year, it really plagued me. And I started advocating for, hey, like, let's serve, let's do meaningful service. Let's be careful with where we're serving. Let's make sure that these problems aren't happening. And meanwhile, I'm asking myself, like, should I be donating to these global charities? Are my efforts doing anything? So last year, during my senior year, I decided to examine this idea of sustainable service in an academic setting. And so for my AP research project, I kind of took charity and how a charity works and broke it down into two parts: effectiveness and sustainability. Sustainability is like, are the projects that an organization is doing, is it long lasting? Is it after the organization leaves, is it going to continue to help the community? And then effectiveness would be like, how much of these funds are actually going towards the cause? How much of it is going to administrative costs? And for this research, and Evan, I don't know if you know this, I kind of worked with Kellen on this, but I actually used Thirst Project as a case study for how a charity should be sustainable. And that included interviewing Kellen, who's another worker at the Thirst Project. I looked at their nonprofit documents and their end of year reports, and I surveyed students from Key Club to gauge how important these concepts of sustainability and effectiveness were to the students, and if these concepts influenced their choice to work with the Thirst Project. Something that I ran into in my research that was really interesting and kind of has to do with this workshop was there's actually this really huge philosophical debate about whether as global citizens we need to be helping others that live across the world from us. And there's arguments for both sides. And two of these arguments that I examined was one from Peter Singer and another from Kwame Anthony Appiah. And in his book, Cosmopolitan, he has this quote and it goes, "I know, gentle reader, that you will pay to send food to starving children. Will you pay to promote reform in the design and execution of the land policies that helped keep their family poor?" This idea really struck me because it really showed that we do need to be helping these global causes, but we need to make sure that the organizations that we're working with care about the lasting impact of their work, ensuring that they're collaborating with the community, not fostering dependence. And Thirst Project is a great example of this. If you know anything about their sustainability efforts, you'll know that they just don't go in and build a well and then leave. They listen and they collaborate with the community and they prepare them to care for the well after Thirst Project leaves. And now we kind of come back to the original question, which is how do we balance our work locally and globally? And I think it depends on two things: the issues that you're passionate about and whether or not there's an organization or a means that you can improve the issue in a lasting way. So for me, I'm really passionate about the Thirst Project, and I always have been since my freshman year. People at my school know me for all of the fundraisers and the work that I've been doing with them. And at the same time, it's important to me to be making lasting positive change in my own community for issues I care about there, whether it's helping teach upcoming first-generation students at my school about how to apply for college or educating about drug misuse prevention. And so for me, I feel like through my research this past year and through my experience with Key Club, I've been able to find a good balance of caring for being a local community citizen and a global citizen and being able to help both issues effectively. So yeah.
I love that, Indigo. Yeah, that's so good. I love that you talked about, correct me if I'm wrong, you said you use that measurement of like, was it effectiveness and sustainability?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such an important tool as we work with Key Clubbers around the world to ask the question as you partner with organizations, as you seek to invest in different initiatives, what's the effectiveness of the work that you're doing and what's the sustainability of the project or the program that you're investing in? Ask the tough questions. And we at Thirst Project, you know, we've always leaned into like, man, give us some tough questions so we can chat about the effectiveness and the sustainability of our work so we can go deeper into that. So maybe we just give that space for, you know, everybody in this workshop right now to ask some of those questions and ask other questions too. So Indigo, I think you have done this before more than I have. So do you want to kind of dive into the Q&A and facilitate some of this?
Yeah, for sure. First, I'm going to answer one question. Are you both seniors in high school? I just graduated. Evan, take that as a compliment.
Yeah, I'll try and take it as a compliment. I'm not a senior in high school. I graduated college about 7 years ago. So I'm an old guy, and I'm going to leave it at that. But I will take it as a compliment, whoever said that. I appreciate you.
Awesome. So another question that came up is, so how can we as high school students create change? What solutions are available?
Yeah. Indigo, I'll let you go first because I think you're a living example of that, and then I'll answer after you if that's okay.
Okay. For me, I think it has a lot to do with keeping my eyes open and trying to, like when I'm living in my community, not just like living my own life, but trying to see like how are the people around me living and seeing not only my problems, but their problems and trying to solve those. And I think a lot of that for me also has come through leadership roles, taking leadership roles and organizing efforts and initiatives to help other people. And that can go for any sort of issue, anything, any problem that I see, and I can think of a way that I can help it is something that I'll try and do.
Yeah, and I love that. I would say there's 4 things. We try to break this down categorically at Thirst Project. 4 things, 4 big ways that you can create change. The power of your voice, your vote, money, or time. And so I'll break those down really quick. Voice, that's raising awareness. I mean, it's honestly too easy right now to use your voice to create change in the world because let's say I go on social media right now and I got my Aunt Susie, who's not a real person, but I'm making her up for this case. My Aunt Susie posts something about COVID-19. and she hasn't linked any articles, it's just her own opinion, then we have to be careful about where we're getting our news from and what is true, what's objective versus subjective. But using your voice, raising awareness about issues, we encourage students to do that all the time. And so if there's an issue that you feel like is not being talked about enough, which I think the Black Lives Matter movement is a perfect example, right? A couple things happened that were the tipping point. It's like, man, we've got to talk about this. We've got to unpack this. And people like need to hear that racism is still like very real in parts around the world. And so I think that's a really good example. And so using your voice, raise awareness, just talk about issues, let people know, hey, this is happening and we can do something about it. Your vote. Oftentimes with votes, especially with high school students, you're like, what? I can't vote. I'm not 18. What do you mean? But even voting in your school elections, if you have that opportunity to vote for different student council or student body leaders, it's really important. Your money, and it's donating to causes that you care about. But with respect to donations, talking about what Indigo's talking about, measure the effectiveness and the sustainability of the organizations or causes that you're contributing money to. That's so important. When you choose to donate or raise money, you have to ask the tough questions. So I think that's one for money. Donate, like just raise money so that money can be put to great use to help us solve real world issues. And then time, that's volunteering. And I know Key Club, tons of volunteering happens all the time in the Key Club world. And lend your time to go and contribute to local organizations that are doing good work so you can volunteer to help people in need. I think that's how you could create change. So that's the 4 ones, the 4 categories that we break it down by.
Awesome, Evan. So I'm going to answer 2 questions, and then if you want to give your insight on the second question. So the first one, it's not really a question. I think there's an advisor on here. If anyone would like to talk to me more about like my research, I would love to share it with you and even get your insight. So I'm going to put my contact information in the chat after this. And then another question was, what places would you most recommend traveling to in order to become better global citizens? And are there any good programs you can think of that students like us can do that through? So Key Club International, we have partnered with a lot of travel organizations throughout the years that I've been a Key Club. Right now we're partnered with Squads Abroad. And we've also partnered with Rustic Pathways, Up With People, which is more for after high school, but Up With People has, gap year programs and different travel programs. Evan, do you have any other organizations that people can go through?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're actually building a program within Thirst Project so we can take students to different parts of the developing world. And so I say Thirst Project starting in, we don't know the future of COVID and how it will break out with respect to international travel, but we will have a program in the future specifically for Key Clubbers where we can take them into the field and show them different parts of Africa where we work and everything else. Squads Abroad, I was actually going to mention because it's a Key Club partner and that just makes sense. I would also say, just locally, I know tons of different churches or other nonprofit organizations oftentimes have travel experiences. I know a good one that has worked with Key Clubbers in the past is Bands. And so if you know anything about Bands, they do some trips, which is awesome, and they do some great work. Now, to answer the first part of that question, recommendations of where to travel to increase your perspective, I would just take a look at part of your identity. And so, for example, I live in Los Angeles. In order to increase my perspective, I'm just going to be candid. Most parts of the United States, I would say, are not going to really increase my perspective because it's just from one part of the US to another. Now, that's not completely true. If I was to travel to different parts of Appalachia, right, compared to the Los Angeles, very different places, perspective would increase. But I would say what travel experiences while still being safe will be a little bit uncomfortable, right? What's going to disrupt maybe your day-to-day thought. And so think about people groups that are living very different lives than you with respect to your identity. I said, how you grew up, race, religion, etc. And go to those places. That's why the Middle East has been so formative for me, and different parts of Africa have been so formative for me. And so don't just travel to a place. I would even say that's super touristy, man. If you can get away from the touristy places, because tourism oftentimes infects and invades those travel experiences, and it removes the ability to increase your perspective. Go local, engage with local people groups, and go to places where you will be the minority. There will not be a ton of people like you with respect to your skin color, your belief system, etc. No, and that's different for everybody.
Awesome. Another question, I'll answer this one, but it was, do you think that you guys made a change when you were in Key Club? Absolutely, definitely 100%. I was in Key Club all 4 years, served in various leadership positions, did a lot of service hours. But even besides that, I think I just made a change by being in Key Club, I learned how I can inspire others to make change. And I really saw that ripple effect. And I was able to like mentor a lot of younger students at my school into leadership roles. And so I definitely feel like I had that impact in creating new leaders. And that's not even mentioning all of the service hours, all of the meaningful projects that I was able to do through Key Club. And then Evan, another question. What does getting involved with Thirst Project mean? They said like giving presentations, fundraising, ...
Yeah, great question. And so a couple different things, and it's actually changing in this upcoming year. And one of the first ones historically was bring a speaker to your school. Now that maybe the future of certain education systems is unknown, you can always facilitate something like this. We'd love to give a virtual presentation, or if in the fall, the winter, or the spring of next year, it's safe to bring presenters in to speak, we'd love to speak at your Key Club, at a divisional. I mean, if decons, we're going to expect they're going to happen. It's going to be amazing. In-person events, we'd love to come and speak. That's one of the first ways to get involved with Thirst Project. Another ways, we have different leadership programs for different students. And so we have a leadership program called the Legacy Youth Leadership Program, where students can come and they can get a leadership certification. And there's different lessons on global citizenship, social consciousness, on how to be a great communicator, these different things that will contribute not just to like your interest in Thirst Project work, but your interest in being a citizen of the world, your interest in doing good regardless of the cause or issue. And so if you're interested in things like that, anything like that, if you're interested in a leadership program, if you're interested in a travel experience, if you're interested in a future internship, because we have internships and we have a college program once you graduate high school, if you're interested in planning a fundraiser or an awareness event, I'm going to send it one more time. Just fill out this form. I just sent it in the chat. Click on that. It'll take you 2 seconds. Fill it out, and I'll make sure to connect with you so we can give you some more resources on how to get involved.
Awesome. So another question, and I think a lot of people missed our introduction, Evan. So someone asked, are you both presenting here as alumni? What leadership positions have you had before? So I guess I'm going to be alumni of Key Club starting tomorrow when I retire from International Board, which is really sad. But so I'm about to be an alumni, and then this year I was an international trustee, last year I was a webmaster, the year before I was a lieutenant governor, and I've also been a club secretary. And then Evan, do you kind of want to explain your role here?
Yeah, absolutely. Just for some context, I'm not in high school anymore. I'm not in college anymore. I'm an old guy. And I actually was not in Key Club in high school because we didn't have Key Club. So we had National Honor Society. I was in National Honor Society. That was like the closest thing to Key Club, even though they're very different. So I work for Thirst Project. We are an official partner of Key Club International. We're a nonprofit. We build freshwater wells in developing countries through students. And so I'm here as a partner of Key Club working for Thirst Project. And I've worked with Key Clubbers from the club level all the way to the international board level for the past 6 years. And like Indigo, I know well, and she's an awesome ambassador for our work. And so, yeah, that's my kind of role and relationship with Key Club.
Evan, someone asked for your contact info. And then
yeah, easy. I'm going to put it in the chat right here. Evan@thirstproject.org. Feel free to email me. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. So just Evan@thirstproject.org.
Awesome. So we have like about 1 minute. One more question. Does that work for you, Evan?
Yep, sounds great.
All right. So how do you use all of your leadership positions, and Evan, your leadership position at Thirst Project, I think is applicable, to facilitate these changes globally and locally? And if you have any tips on how to do so.
Yeah, Indigo, do you want to answer that first?
Oh.
What were you going to say?
I said, could you go first?
I would love to, yeah. This is me all just wanting to define things, but define leadership, right? I would define leadership. It's really simple. I'm going to give it one word: influence. And if leadership is influence, then everybody's a leader. We all can influence other people. And so how have I been able to use my leadership to influence and make change around the world? I'll be honest, with respect to Thirst Project, it's really started with passion. I can't tell you the number of people. I know I've stood in front of thousands of people that walked into a room and really didn't have any care or concern for the global water crisis. I know it. Okay? People have told me all the time. Their mind wasn't on the water crisis. They weren't even thinking about how lucky we were to have access to clean water. But if you can come in and you know that just by standing on a stage or standing in front of people or just by talking to somebody one-on-one, you now have the ability to influence someone. If you come at something with passion and if you know what you're talking about, right, then that can go so far in making change and influencing other people. And who knows? I mean, this conversation right here somebody in this workshop could go on to study abroad because we emphasize how important it is to study abroad. And then that could, show them what major they want to pursue or what country they want to live in, et cetera. You just never know the power of a conversation. And so come at life with passion and enthusiasm. And I think that alone will take you far in leadership and your ability to make change in the world.
I for sure agree with that. And I think something that kind of goes hand in hand with that, and something that I've learned a lot in high school and that I've really been focusing on being, is genuine, and being genuine to the issues that I care about, and making sure that I'm showing my passion for them. And if something isn't what I care about, then I'm not going to pretend to care about it. I'm not going to be like a fake activist. I'm going to be passionate about the things I do. And I think another tip for that is what you're saying, like when you're a leader, it's not just about you're doing everything. You're not doing every single project. You're also inspiring other leaders to take the issues that they care about and do something about those issues as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great, Indigo. I think we have to wrap up. Before we do, Indigo, I want to thank Indigo. Indigo is an amazing resource. I know she dropped her email in here. Man, reach out to Indigo, because she's run the gamut of Key Club with respect to the different positions. And now she said tomorrow she's going to be alumni. And so, man, she's just an awesome resource and a model of what leadership at a high school level looks like. And then please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to email back and forth, fill out that form. We want to connect with more Key Clubbers to change the world. So thanks for being a part of this, you all.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. It's been such a pleasure to present for you guys.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you all. Be well. Have a great day.
Bye, guys.